Okay, we are going to use the DIDLS technique to analyze Sexton's All My Pretty Ones. I think it should also be noted that this is the title of her collection, so obviously this is a significant poem and we'll be referring back to it quite often. The first area with diction, remember we were looking at the types of words she was using. What I see here is a combination of both monosyllabic and polysyllabic words, and I think this emphasizes the internal conflict that she's going through and how her father's death affects her in multiple ways. We see gold key. This is a monosyllabic word, but then you have cardboard faces in order to contrast that. Moving down to the next section, we're looking at the type of language Sexton's employing, and predominantly she's using formal language. We talked about the term verbiage, the use of referring to her father as having an alcoholic tendency in the last stanza versus perhaps if it were informal, just calling him a drunk. Moving into the denotative or connotative. The term pretty widow, I thought this word in particular stood out to me. One, I almost felt it was an oxymoron and somewhat ironic because stereotypically widows are often pictured as sullen and not pretty, and yet here we see Sexton referring to the woman that her father was hoping to marry as such. Concrete or abstract images. I think we see, once again, just like in The Truth the Dead Know, Sexton using concrete images in order to portray an abstract concept. In the first stanza, we see a lot of concrete images and regarding the characterization of her father, the 20 suits, the English Ford, the gold key, the half of a woolen mill. And all of this is attempting to connect to the abstract concept of love. That's even shown in the fourth stanza with all of the terms regarding the snapshots of her parents' marriage, right? The speedboat races, the cotillion, concrete places that were supposed to be representing the love that her parents had. Moving on to our use of cacophonous or euphonious words. The third stanza, we see crackling and wrinkly as tobacco leaves, clippings where Hoover outran the Democrats. One, we see that this is the consonants of the repeated K sound, and it causes the cacophony. It indicates that external conflict that she's having. Notice that her father's scrapbook doesn't include pictures of her. It includes pictures of time and things that aren't necessarily associated with his family or his daughter. Moving on to the next section of DIDLS, we're going to be looking at the images. And remember, first you're going to look at images used as figures of speech and the effect of the image. Immediately in the first stanza, the use of the term cold slumber. One, we've already identified, it's a euphemism for death, but the contrasting connotation of these words definitely emphasizes the internal conflict that our speaker, and we can pretty much know or declare that it's Sexton at that point, that our speaker has internal conflict as she's dealing with the anger and grief of her father's death. The use of 3 days later you died and the biblical allusion to Christ, which is in the third stanza, we felt that this was the beginning of the comparison between her father and God, and that was going to be continuing on throughout the poem. Letter B wants you to look at images that are used as symbols. The simile we talked about that stood out to us in the first impressions, the soldier who holds his bugle like a toy, or for this velvet lady who cannot smile. We felt that those symbols, they were, people in the past who she doesn't know, and this is symbolic of her father. She doesn't know her father, and she doesn't know these images that her father was, holding on to. Who is his family, or who is he, and trying to define him in that manner. The yellow scrapbook that you began, that visual imagery and also the symbol of the memories. And again, this is her attempting to discover who was this man she called her father. Moving into the next section, we're looking at details, facts that were included. We know that her mother and father died, here she says a year apart. We know that her father was engaged within a month of her mother's death, but died before remarrying. We know she grew up extremely wealthy. The first and the fourth stanza let us know that. We also know that the father lost his wealth, and this is discovered in the first stanza with the phrase, the residence you could not afford. What we don't know is how her father lost his wealth, but we could assume that alcoholism was a contributing factor because there was a definite reference to that in the final stanza. We don't necessarily know how her mother and father died. The line, "the second shock boiling its stone to your heart," does suggest a heart attack, but she doesn't directly say this. Remember back in Foster, if it's something to do with the heart, it always means something else. And so we might be making some ideas that, the heart attack, yes, but is it because his heart was always so cold to his family and specifically to his daughter? Moving on to language, the type of language that we see being used, again, formal language, and we thought this was used to distance herself from her father and the memories of him. It creates a detached tone, and we don't necessarily know if this is genuine. I think she's attempting to be detached even because it's easier to be. She wants to be strong and she wants to be angry at her father, but the reality is she loved this man and she is seeking closure. What we do see about how does the language convey, basically, how does it characterize our speaker, and what is the attitude? We see a lot of proper nouns being used to convey the setting and the social status of her family. This makes what we call the fall definitely more intense and severe, and it's the fall from that economic and social status. It's almost like she is having to deal with some embarrassment now and pick up the pieces as a result of her father's actions, and so she's left with kind of the mess to clean up, and this is part of the reason why she's probably so angry. Do other characters treat someone differently? We definitely felt that there were tone shifts throughout the poem, and they convey the different emotions that our speaker is feeling with. The stanzas reflect the different memories that she has, and each contribute to her anger and the external conflict between herself and her father. And the last stanza, though, is quite a significant shift, especially the last line, because at that point you start to see that she understands she has to forgive in order to move on. The last area of DIDLS, again, you're going to be looking at syntax, and the first part is the form of the poem, so always discuss how the poem is set up here, talk about the structure, and if there's any rhyme scheme. This is a 5-stanza poem, and the rhyme scheme is quite complex compared to The Truth the Dead Know. It's a A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, E rhyme scheme, and it includes slant rhyme as well. Slant rhyme typically indicates conflict, and even though we have a purposeful rhythm, that slant rhyme emphasizes the external conflict with her father, and I think the complexity of the rhyme scheme shows the complexity of their relationship. Letter B, you're looking at the sentence variety and any patterns that you may or may not notice. What we notice is that the simple syntax is a technique that Sexton has employed now 2 times in her poems, so it might be something you'll be looking at throughout this collection. And the stanzas ending with those simple syntax sometimes, and for the most part, are showing a shift in actually setting, moving from the past to the present. There's also the use of parallel structure. And the 4th stanza, the 4th stanza's parallel structure is showing the relationship between herself and her father. Letter C, sentence beginnings. With the poem immediately starting with the use of father, it lets us know that Sexton is the speaker and that she is addressing her father, that this poem is an address directly to him. Father is an apostrophe because her father has passed away, and most of you are familiar with this word, but remember the movie Up? This is a great example of, the protagonist of that film keeps talking to his wife who's passed. Moving on to D, D's looking at unusual punctuation. The 5th stanza, my God, Father, each Christmas day with your blood will I drink down your glass of wine. The appositive phrase of father, combined with the rhetorical question, likens her father to God, and this reiterates her internal conflict with him. The use of alcohol is ironic here because when you take communion, you're taking the body and blood of Christ, and this allows for your sins to be forgiven. Yet here, it creates an accusatory tone towards her father's alcoholism, and that this was the downfall of not only their social status and economic status, but also the relationships, which really is more important than anything else. Finally, you're going to be looking at the effect the structure has on the tone, and overall, we felt that the sentence structure denotes shifts in the poem. The first four stanzas ending in the simple sentences, the last stanza shows this shift in the entire poem because it allows for her to forgive her father, as evidenced by the complex sentence structure. She is reliving her childhood memories, and she eventually assumes the adult mindset of forgiveness. And that tone, it shifts from being somewhat and mostly accusatory to a sense of reconciliation, that she's able to find closure. I hope that you were able to understand how to use this technique. Your homework is to annotate and then complete the DIDLS chart for A Curse Against Elegy. Please enjoy your last few days of snow days.